Cool. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about higher order functions. That means that any function that accepts a function as a parameter or returns a function, which can be super useful. So functions in JavaScript. We've been making lots of them this week. They are first-class objects in JavaScript, which means you can have data structures that hold functions like objects and arrays. You can also pass functions as an argument to other functions or return them from a function. So here we have an array that has a function, and you can imagine if you wanted to collect a series of functions that you run in order, that could be useful. So passing functions into functions, these are typically called callbacks, CB for short in this example. When we pass it into a function, you're not invoking it as the parameter, you're just passing in the variable name that holds that function, and then at some point in the function you might call the callback function. So here we're invoking it. Oh. I don't know what happened there. Here we're invoking it. Here we are not. We're just passing in the variable name. So if we had a function called let's go outside. Maybe we are making a storytelling app, and it takes a weather callback because we don't know what the weather will be when we use this function maybe. And so we'll console log let's go outside because we'll do that every time. And then we'll call the weather callback, which will do something. We don't know yet. We have an idea, but we don't know. So we have another function called warm weather. And this will just console log grab some sunscreen. It's hot. This should be in quotes.
Sarah, can you zoom in a little bit?
Oh yeah, definitely. Sorry about that. Cool. So now we have this function that logs that it's hot. We should grab some sunscreen. And we have another function that accepts a function, callback, and calls it after they go outside. So now we can call let's go outside, pass in warm weather, and we should log out let's go outside and then grab some sunscreen, it's hot. Cool. But then if we make another function, it's cold weather, and that just console logs out then we can call let's go outside with cold weather. And we'll have a different behavior based on the weather callback being passed in, but this part will still be the same. So then we now log out let's go outside and then which was from the cold weather function. Again, we didn't invoke it when we passed it in as a parameter. We only invoked it when we wanted whatever operation that function does to occur. Okay, I don't know what happened here. Okay, I'm going to just bring this all out. Okay, so here's another example of calling a bunch of functions, some that get passed in as a callback. So if we have log a string, and it takes the string and just console logs it. If we put apples into it, it console logs out apples, expected. Then we have callsFuncWithHello, and it accepts a function as a callback, and it returns whatever this function return value is with hello passed in as the argument. So if we callsFuncWithHello and pass in logs a string, we should return logs a string with the word hello. So again, we'll console log out hello this time. Does that follow so far? So then we have add a word that takes a string and adds world to it. And we get call add world to what a wonderful. That should be the string what a wonderful world. So if we console log out the return value of add world with what a wonderful passed in, we'll console log out what a wonderful world. If we put it all together, then if we have callsFuncWithHello, add world, we will have hello world, and we can console log out that result. This one we don't use logs a string, but we could in another way if we wanted to. So this add world gets passed in, so hello is this string, so hello world. And so the return value is that concatenated string.
Could you put calls a function with hello with the parameter add world into logs a string function in your hello world? Like this, since you calls a function with the last calls a function with hello add world result is a string.
Yeah.
So you could put that whole entire.
Yeah, I don't see why we wouldn't be able to. So let's. Nope. Oh, here we go. Okay. So if we comment out in all of these, and then instead of assigning this a variable, if we say logs a string, it should just log it out, and then we can eliminate line 22. Let's make this clear. Cool. So this is a function that accepts a string, and this function returns a string that accepts a function. Cool. Another example of this would be this where we're returning numbers. This would be if you wanted to make some calculator and you only want to write subtract ones, add ones in calc, then we'll have sum is calc with the number 10 passed in, the number 5, and the callback. So this callback is add. Add accepts two numbers, number 1, number 2, so it gets passed in here, and so it returns this, which gets returned. So this should return 15. But if we pass in subtract the function, don't change anything else, just the callback, we'll be using this function instead, so we'll be returning num1 minus num2. But that's the only difference here. Any questions on that? So you can return in callback, and it won't return until you return from the outer function. An example of something that you might use a lot that takes a callback that's sort of built into JavaScript is setInterval. And so the log counter is a callback function. So it's just a function you pass into another function. And this is the number of milliseconds to wait before each time you run that function. So if we want to log out burr every second, then we could do setInterval with cold weather and then 1000. Then when we run it, interval, I feel like, thank you, sorry. Good call. So it logs burr out every second, which might not be useful here, but if you had a counter where every second or every minute you wanted to perform some sort of operation, this could be super useful. I'm going to run this again so it stops it. But again, this isn't invoked when we pass it into setInterval. setInterval will invoke it itself. We don't have to worry about that. We just need to pass in the variable that represents that function.
So it's like a timer thing. So like in the applications, like when you're signing in, so they make sure you're not a robot that has like a timer. That
Yeah.
Be like...
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, and you can put it for however long. It could be like 1 millisecond. It could be 10 minutes. But
Okay.
this number is in milliseconds. So 1,000 is 1 second. Something else super useful with higher order functions are they can return a function. So maybe you want to do a few operations and then return a function that depends on what you do beforehand. It can be great to compose a function. So let's look at an example of if we wanted to generate a random number, but we don't know what it's between. We just want to make a function random number that takes a max value, so like between 1 and 10. We can have a function within it that uses this max num to calculate it. So we would do var random generator is a function, and that is going to, we'll get the random number using math.random. We'll give you a number between 0 and 1. So if we take that, we multiply it by math.floor of maxnum, which will just make it like a whole number, and then we do math.floor of this one. So we round it down to the whole number. This will be a random number between 1 and whatever number we pass in. And then if we turn rand, and then here, we want to return the function that we made, because that's the only way we'll have access to it to invoke it. And we're not invoking it here because we want to use it. So if we invoked it, it would be returning a number. But now we're able to do var random between 10. And we pass in 10. Now every time we call random between 10, it'll give us a new number between 1 and 10. And since this inner function doesn't take any arguments, which it can if you want it to, but since it doesn't, we just invoke it with parentheses, and we don't have to pass anything in. So now if we make 3 or 4 different numbers and console log them all out, they should be 4 separate ones. Cool. And you can then use random number again. We can do between 1 and 1,000. And then if we have like R1, which is a bad variable name, but we're just going to pretend. And the way that it uses 1,000 and sort of holds it for this instance, and random between 10 holds 10, as it's not going to mess it up calling it again down here. And it uses closure to have this max num saved in this instance of random generator. So if we console log R1, R2, R3, and R4, we should have 4 different numbers between 1 and 1,000. So you can see how this could be really useful. If, like, maybe you don't have all the information right when you're making this function. Like, I don't know what my max num is going to be, but later on in the app, I might have that value, and then I can make my generator. Any questions on returning a function? Note that this inner function, random generator, can return in it, and it's not going to prematurely return. It's not going to return until you invoke it down here. Yes. Like the random num variable or the this one. Yeah. Yeah.
You cannot have more than one variable being logged into the next function that it's on.
Like I can't be returning like 2 different functions from this outer function. Yeah, you can only return 1. I mean, if you wanted to collect several functions, you could put them in an array, or an object of some sort. Yeah. And we can shorten this by just saying return function. And we don't even need this line. But for clarity, it's nice to, especially when you're first getting comfortable with higher order functions, to declare a variable and set it equal to the function and then return it. But feel free to just return function. And this is fine. It's called an anonymous function, but it doesn't need a name because we're never really using it except to return down here. Great question. So this return will only happen when this function gets run, when it gets invoked. So you don't have to worry about it prematurely returning some number until you invoke it. You can actually invoke, going to comment this out real quick. You can invoke a higher order function immediately if you want to. It's not super useful just because I don't know why you would like make it and name it and then only use it once. But if you wanted to, we can invoke it here, which would return this function, and then invoke it with, invoke it here with a number, and then invoke it here to invoke this inner function, I think. Nope, never mind.
I think we have to think of the stack, what happens.
Yeah. Oh, yes, that's what I'm thinking of. You can invoke it this way. So if you wanted this return, this is a function, you can do this, and it'll just return a number. So if we console log random num invoked with 10, and then immediately invoked, this return value will be a number. And I think it'll give us a new one each time. Random number generators are fun. Okay, yes.
So why do you need the layered function or the nested function? Why can't it just be the ran equals like all of line 21 and return ran?
Yeah, great question. So if we comment this out, and we're just returning the number, every time we call it, it's going to return us a number. So we wouldn't have the ability to make 1 for 10, 1 for 100, 1 for 1,000, and just use that function every time. We would have to pass in the number every single time. So here, if we console logged out 10, it'll give us a random number every time, but maybe you don't want to carry around like this value to pass in. You just want to do it once. Cool. So one thing to know with functions is with higher order functions, especially when you're returning a function, is scope. And remember, the curlies are sort of like that one-way glass window mirror thing that cops use, where you can see outside, but you can't see inside what the variables are. So if we have a variable in this inner function, we can use it in here, but we can't use it out here. And then this name variable within make greeting, we don't have access to it here. We can't console log name and get it. But we can use make greeting, which has access to name. So here we can console log name within the inner function because we can get outside variables in, but we can't console log out name down here. And that's just scoping. The last thing we're going to talk about tonight is closure. Closure is a concept that you don't have to, be able to explain it to anyone right now. Admissions isn't going to be like, explain to me closure, but it's a good thing to keep in mind, especially when using higher order functions. Like in that random number generator, passing in the max num in the outer function held on to that value when you call that inner function every time. And it does that through closure. So it's a way of JavaScript sort of like remembering its environment. Yeah, I'll send out a few articles about closure, but it's not anything you need to be comfortable with yet. Just sort of start being aware of it. When you hear it, take note of it. Any questions on closure, functions?
Can you go back a slide?
Yeah. So this example is not a higher order function because it's not returning a function. It's returning the greet return value, which is just console logging hello name. So when we call make greeting, we just invoke it once and it'll console log. Down here, it's returning the function that console logs. So that's why we have a greeting, which is a variable name that holds the inner function that we have to invoke. Or we could double invoke it by calling make greeting and then 2 sets of parentheses. So I'll send out these slides, and I'll send out the video once it uploads to YouTube.